Hello and welcome to our latest and greatest Human Synergistics Roundtable event. Today's topic on the area of organizational culture, leadership, and artificial intelligence. My name is John Van Etten. I represent Human Synergistics, the organization behind such diagnostic instruments as the Organizational Culture Inventory for the purpose of measuring and ultimately developing organizational culture. I'm happy to be joined today by three of our esteemed accredited consultants who utilize these tools with clients, leaders, and organizations to create positive and real sustainable change. So thank you for joining me today, starting off with Mr. Jochen Grotenhöfer of Transition Consult, highly experienced in all HS tools. And thank you again, sir, for taking the time to contribute with us today.
Yeah.
Uh, Mr. Philip Botha of Searchlight Consulting, thank you as well. Good to have you with us once again, and always good to hear your insights. And finally, of course, Mr. Christian Sellars. Thank you, Christian, for joining, of Transforming Engagements, and always good to have your insights as well. So thank you. Happy to join you guys again for a roundtable event. Again, this is an opportunity for us to sort of reach out to a broader, hopefully, community to talk about the sort of things that we do in terms of measurement with human synergistics tools and how that measurement is helpful for the purpose of real, positive, and sustainable leadership and organizational culture development. So we have a variety of topics today. We've published a list of those discussions, and we'll get to, I think, a very interesting combination of topics around best practices in coaching leaders, why culture development is important, how to explain that and draw some connections, and also with a focus today a bit on AI and artificial intelligence. So I guess I'll kick things off and jump right in. The first topic I wanted to discuss and sort of bring to the table is the use of artificial intelligence in the area of organizational development, leadership coaching, organizational development, and so on. That's a very broad net. But to start off and to be a bit specific, I'm happy to reintroduce, I suppose I should say, an aspect of artificial intelligence that Human Synergistics has begun incorporating into our tools. So I'll just give a really brief introduction to what that new capability is, and then interested to hear, of course, your insights as a team, and anyone else who's joining us, please feel free to type into the comments. Happy to answer questions on kind of the next step of data analysis in human synergistics. So for those of you who might not be familiar, if we're starting this discussion thinking about an instrument that we use to measure essentially patterns of behavior playing out in organizations, and secondarily, how those patterns are influencing the well-being and performance of people working within those organizations. So for these kinds of developmental tools, we need to measure more than just one thing. We need to measure two factors in a causal relationship. So we measure those performance criteria. Those are across a variety of areas, everything from employee motivation, satisfaction, level of stress, ability of teams to work cohesively, collaboratively, creativity, adaptability, so on and so forth. That is one area, of course, of our focus, are those areas of essentially human well-being and performance. While the second is looking at patterns of behavior in the case of culture playing out at the organizational level that are influencing those outcomes. So in simple terms, we're looking at basically measuring behavior and performance and then taking the next step to understand the relationship between those two things. What behaviors are playing out that are positively contributing to our people and their ability to perform? What might we be doing that's holding people back, getting in the way, or just simply unnecessary? So that analysis of patterns of behavior, of culture, and how they influence well-being and performance is really the basis for development. Once we understand that relationship, then moving forward, we understand what kinds of behaviors we need to role model, encourage, facilitate, enable in the organization to drive that performance criteria in the right direction. So this data is something that we've been providing to organizations since the OCI was launched, I believe, in 1984, and it shows up in several areas of the reports. And what I mean is, again, that relationship between essentially how we behave and how we perform. And in traditional reports, as you all know who use them, you'll see that relationship in correlation analysis toward the back of the report, where we show you very clearly not only the strength but the direction in terms of positive, negative that culture is having on those various outcomes across every. So a very clear understanding of what's contributing to our performance and what's not. You can see this in other areas as well, like subgroups and comparative profiles. But the point is, it's always been something that I think clients and many accredited practitioners needed a little more tangibility and clarity on, because ultimately it's those connections that are leading us to decide what about the culture we might want to address, develop, and in what direction. So understanding those underlying connections between what we do and how we perform are really key. So the new step is that, and I believe this has been several years in the development of in human synergistics, a new aspect of our culture reports that provide an artificial intelligence analysis of that kind of data relationship. So this is not as we're accustomed to, of course, a language GPT sort of chat AI, rather a statistical mathematical AI that is designed to look at client data, look at and identify those most subtle, perhaps, connections between these factors to give clients very clear and specific recommendations on where we need to be putting our efforts. So it becomes as straightforward as, if it's really employee satisfaction and motivation that are critical to us, we can select those two factors in the online report. The AI will analyze our data and across the entire culture profile, identify the two patterns within the current culture that need to be shifted, that need to be moved in order to drive that outcome in a positive direction. And this is giving us that additional level of clarity and specificity. And for those of you who are familiar, the system also goes that additional step of, once we understand the patterns that need to shift, it identifies the climate factors that most significantly need to be addressed. So, and this is based on a combination of, again, more sophisticated data analysis than we've been able to provide in reports before. So I think, this is very new, so happy to talk about this and sort of introduce it today. I've had a few of our clients and APs. I think a few of you have seen these reports as well. So far what I'm hearing is that they're very helpful in terms of, look, if this is what we want to focus on and improve, what are the key areas that we really need to be investing our time, efforts, and energy in order to move the needle, in order to really create change. I'm a little worried it's bordering on oversimplification of the whole system, but happy to talk about that as well. And the other point I would make is that usually when consultants who are experienced with these tools you look at a client report and identify what they might think are likely areas to focus on, for the most part, that's been consistent with what the AI is coming up with as well. However, sometimes it's identifying things that we might have really overlooked. And I think it's a nice way, at least, to have some confirmation that, it's one more way of recognizing in this data that, this is where we do need to be putting our efforts and energies. So I'll stop there, and happy to and interested to hear your feedback as accredited practitioners who use these tools in terms of how helpful that kind of feedback could be, and if that brings an additional benefit to you and your client organizations. Mhm.
Let me break the spell.
Let me get this off.
Please, thanks, sir.
Do you have an example of where you've experienced the implementation of this, John? It sounds fascinating. I haven't worked with it myself, but I'm really curious to hear how it works in practice.
Yeah, well, I was happy to share one with you offline. At this point, I'm having there's a few reasons it's challenging to share the platform openly, but it's a very simple. So I'll just explain. I mean, essentially, what you're given is the how culture works model of our tools, and you're asked to identify an outcome that we need to change. This is, a very common way that we debrief this kind of data is identifying the ultimate performance criteria that needs to change, be it, again, employee engagement, motivation, whatever that might be. So it literally, you're selecting that on an interactive interface. So this is on our new online interactive report platform. And you have all of the outcomes listed, and you can select, I believe, 2 of them initially, and the rest the system completes independently. Once we know its role clarity and motivation that you really care about, then the system moves backwards to identify causally, again, which 2 patterns in the current culture need to shift, and secondarily, which climate factors need to be leveraged in order to drive that behavior. So it really takes a lot of what might have been, digging through the PDF report to connect these dots. This is sort of what everyone used to call still does, call the red thread through the report. Once we understand, what we're trying to change, then we're digging through the data to see what's affecting that causally and how do we shift that. So this is taking all of that complexity out of your hands and making it, I think, much more tangible. So it really is as easy as clicking role clarity and motivation, and you need to shift these 2 styles, and here are the 4 to 6 climate factors that are most strongly linked to those 2 styles. There you go. Now, again, in accreditation, I talk through a variety of different ways that clients can identify climate factors that they want to develop. There's sort of different methodologies depending on the purpose, but this is yet another one, highly data-driven and objective way to get that kind of output specificity.
I really look forward to
Awesome.
hearing
Well, we should
a use case when it finally is there. But it sounds great.
Cool. Yeah, we have sample data, and I do have a few new clients, but unfortunately, we don't have a data set we can share openly right now. But happy to set up as accredited practitioner. We could set up an internal and walk you through it. But so it still does require the work to be done. It's going to get you back to here are the areas in the system that must be addressed in a best case. And that usually is something you'll find, I think, that confirmed your suspicion in the first place and what you were finding in other areas of the report. But then again, those are serving as the building blocks for a potential action plan and development. So, just even though the system can go so far, and I agree, it's a very cool thing as to give us that, here are the 5 or 6 things that really need to be addressed. It doesn't mean that that's going to happen unless we get that message, take it seriously, put in the time and effort, be consistent, and move the needle. So I still, the work is still there, but I hope this brings more clarity to everyone, and also perhaps confidence to everyone. The consultants who use our tools, and the fact that this is the right way forward for our client, and I'm giving them the right recommendations and guidance, and also for our end user clients, that they really are making decisions on the best data and information.
Thank you.
Cool.
I'm running a project now with more than 100 subgroups. Should be interesting to use that.
Oh goodness, yes. True.
John, I've had the opportunity with one client to do the aggregate report, and I had the benefit also of having the culture manager of this client go through accreditation with OER/OCI. And the thing for me that was almost transformational was observing how the culture manager took ownership of the data once they had the interactive report, because even for me, having 300 pages of subgroup reports in a PDF, is enough to give you a bit of a migraine. But having something that basically starts at the top and says, okay, these are the 1 or 2 outcomes that matter to you, and these seem to be the things really that are driving them. So it's a very good way actually of providing both for consultants and for accredited clients the opportunity to play. And maybe they won't get the same depth that they're going to get from spending 5 or 6 hours reading through everything. But let's be honest, how many people actually do that? Giving someone the chance to say, okay, these are the things that seem to be driving things most hard. The interesting thing for me as well is, like, there were some biases I had driven by the sort of size of some of the extensions. So my client perfectionism was a big issue. I was quite focused on that. But it wasn't such a powerful driver of outcomes. Like, the major outcomes that were driving poor results in this case were passive. And the remedies then were, okay, build autonomy, find ways of reducing punishment, like build confidence in the organization, which would have been quite a different message than saying, okay, let's first focus on perfectionism and then go to these other things. So when you're facing an absolute thicket of results, which, it's part of the glory of working with human synergistics, you get such richness. But, unless you're super, super confident, it also can be quite intimidating. The glorious thing about this AI tool is it just gives you a place to start. And particularly for those folk who are less confident wading through the sub-reports, you can play around a bit, you can change your outcomes, and you can see, okay, what are some of the drivers here? What are the climate factors that really are making a difference? And so, I think it's a fabulous addition to the armamentarium that human synergistics already gives you. So, well done.
Yeah. Cool. And I should also point out that it's only available, obviously, sort of as part of the report. So it's really only made available to accredited practitioners. So this isn't something that clients are going to be addressing directly. It's more an amendment to the report in terms of an additional piece of content for you to, use and leverage as you see appropriate. So, but I agree. I think it helps to bring that confidence across. And cool. Good. Then maybe in an upcoming roundtable, we'll have a client who's used the AI report, and we've used them by then, and we can speak a little bit more to them. But getting back to your point, Christian, about the online interactive report, which also in the scope of things is somewhat new. So having all of the online culture, all of the culture organizational level data, models, reports, everything online in an interactive format, I think is really, really helpful. I mean, you're right. We had all of that information in the PDF reports, but not only is it less confusing, but it's easier to move through. You can jump from this subgroup to that subgroup and this part of the model to that part of the model very easily in that interactive format dynamically. So I find it really helpful when you're initially debriefing these reports to use that kind, because that way as leaders say, well, what's going on over here? And what is this over here? And what does that have to do with that? Then we can jump into that piece and zoom into that detail. But we're not sort of faced with that level of content throughout, if you will. So I think it's the ability to be dynamic in how we go through the reports that I find to be really fun. So good. I should say, upcoming, I know we're working internally on this kind of AI analysis and further support for other tools, particularly leadership and management impact. So tracing, just did an impact accreditation, but tracing again outcomes back through impact strategies, and having again an AI data-driven method for helping people to have one more way of looking at that feedback and identifying where they want to focus. So very good. Thank you guys for the feedback, and happy to build on that moving forward. We're maybe 5 minutes ahead of schedule. Jochen, is it all right if we step into your topic?
Sure. Yeah, I can do that.
there aren't any other questions on AI reports. All right. Good. So thank you, Jochen, again for taking part. We each sort of brought a topic along with us today, so I very much appreciate yours, which is from symptom to cause, reasons for culture assessment. So if you'd like to introduce that topic for us today.
Well, yeah, thank you, John. Over the past 15 years that I've been working with this model, I've seen a change in the reasoning that people come up with in terms of, well, we might use human synergistics, we might use the tools. And I've more or less grouped a few reasons together which might help any practitioner to identify an opportunity to not just use their strategic, organizational, marketing, whatever skills they might have and offer and bring to the table, but identify a few keywords that the people that you talk to bring to the table, which might help you identify the need for the use of either one of the tools. Mm-hmm. When I started using the tools, culture was not an issue for an organization to consider as something they wanted and needed and should have. I do remember a case very early on where one individual, head of operation, actually approached me because he had a personal interest in the subject of culture, and he introduced me and helped me get into that for the first time ever. And it was a learning experience which I will never forget. The reason at that time was an organizational reason. The organization was expanding their sales activities beyond the German market. They wanted to start producing in Southeast Asia, which was a conflict of interest in terms of the quality of the product, which would not go well with the Southeast Asian perception of what was being done there. So we did the cultural survey based on an organizational perception of people don't understand what we're doing. Another organizational reason for starting something like that, that I see growing quickly as we speak, is mergers and acquisitions. Again, you would do financial due diligence for the last 50 years, but a cultural due diligence is something that is pretty new as far as this is concerned. Right. I have a very concrete example. We're dealing with a lot of banks in Germany at the moment, savings banks, who, due to regulatory requests by the superseding supervisory body, the BaFin, need to provide and establish personnel and services that they can't do within the size that they have. So they start grouping together and merging. And it has become a pretty visible issue for them to say, okay, as we get together, how can we make sure that we keep all the people? Because getting people on board has become increasingly difficult, has become increasingly more expensive. And again, an organizational reason for setting the organization up in such a way that it can sustain the change is one of the reasons that I find when I talk to leaders. And again, culture is not necessarily the key word. The key word is market changes, organizational changes,
adaptability.
By other organizations were being taken over. What can we do? That's the one big set of keywords that I hear in the market, which allows us as practitioners and as users of human synergistics products, or any other product for that matter, to actually turn the focus not away from the organization, but give another perspective on that organizational challenge that the organization that entity is facing. A second reason that I hear more often these days is that people are revisiting their strategy from a business perspective. And as I said before, they realize that to survive in the market, they need to do things differently. Most of them have gone through extensive reorganization, as you would every 5 years. They have state-of-the-art IT systems, including cloud services, big data, and AI. And the one thing that they don't really govern is personnel. Starting from the top, I've had several cases of leaders call me and say, can you help me get rid of my peer CFO, CHRO, COO? I can't stand him. He's sort of holding me back. Need to get rid of him. I'm not in the business of getting rid of people on the leadership level, even though it happens after I've been there a few times. But it actually brings to the table interesting discussion is how about a level of communication? What are you doing to them? Do they understand what you're trying to say? Do they understand your strategy? Are you on a common level of understanding? Do you speak the same language? How can you cope with his behavior? Is this a sender-receiver problem? All of these issues around communication on a leadership level open the door wide to actually start doing a survey on the leadership level or beyond that in terms of their cultural behavior preferences. I'm not using the word culture very, very rarely when I go and talk to these people. I'll try to address them on the level of their pain points, if you will. And the third area that you might consider when you talk to clients on issues that they haven't divulged yet, on the matter of, can you come in, we need to speak. I mean, if you are a strategic advisor, that's the best thing that you can have. Let's discuss off topic, let's discuss behind closed doors. These are the things that worry me. That's the moment that they provide you with all sorts of insights, which will give you a hint what to look at. What I found helpful, and I hope it works now, I'm trying to share something here, is the Culture Model Works slide, which I'm going to try and share. Hope that works. Doesn't so far.
If it was uploaded, there should just be you should see it below and with an option to add to stage.
Yeah. No, I see it, but I can't present it. Sorry, that's me, guys. Oh, there we go. Yes.
There we go. That's what we'd like.
That's if you don't have it, try and get it. It's a piece of paper that Human Synergistics makes available.
Happy to share this.
Organization cultural inventory. Side note: there is a massive information readily available to practitioners in particular that make life so much more easy. And I'm using this model to identify keywords that a client might have raised when he's talked to me. And one of the areas that I look into is the outcomes. So I'll make that point before. If you look at the outcomes and you look at things like, is motivation an issue? I told you about my first job 15 years ago. Motivation was a problem. Satisfaction was a problem. Intention to stay was not a problem, interestingly enough, because the place that they worked was in a remote German area where nothing else was going on otherwise. So people would have needed to travel for 80 miles to get somewhere else. So they'd stay, but they weren't motivated. They weren't satisfied. There was no insecurity, but there was plenty of stress. So, and that's what the client told me. He was talking about stress. He was talking about motivation issues, and he couldn't place it. He didn't know why that was the case. He couldn't make out what the reason for that was. So that provides you with an indoor, if you will, an opening into a discussion. So let's find that out. I don't know that either. I might talk to you with my experience of 40 years in the business, but I'm not. I can't prove it. You have to believe me. My expertise is at stake here. Another thing that you would find is if you go into group outcomes, we don't coordinate with each other. We cannot talk to each other. The inter-unit coordination, for example, in this case, this is an example, was sub-zero or worse than the average, sub-average. Also, there's something that people, leaders identify, can see, and don't have a solution for. Our external adaptability, we are not winning market share. We don't seem to be quickly enough in introducing the new stuff that our competitors have introduced. What about innovation? What about shop for efficiency and quality? These are very good indicators that people do not connect with a culture survey in the first instance. And that's why I say, well, I'm not doing a culture survey, or I don't call it that way. I'm doing a survey of the bylaws of the organization. Why do you behave that way? And that sort of translates very quickly into something that the organization would like to understand and see. Sorry, I got on the one page here. What I wanted to show you is a third part, and that's the causal factors. In some people, in some cases, and that's not very common, but it does happen, leaders, interested parties, shall we call them, are also talking about something like this: mission and philosophy. I don't think people understand what I'm trying to say. I've had that a few times, where particularly heads of organizations despair over an inability, visible inability, to not being able to bring the message across. People don't understand what this strategy means, what it means to them, why they should follow, how it makes any sense to them. And again, your opportunity to say, okay, if that's the case, let's delve into that. You can do that on a leadership level. You can do that on an organizational level, departmental, or all organizations, and get a whole lot out of it. Prime indicator for an organizational review, for example, obviously, is the bottom right issue of leadership. That's something that has become recently much more clearly visible to leadership themselves. They're much more aware of this being an issue, particularly with their with their peers, not with themselves necessarily. But at least they're looking at that, and skills and qualities. Also, with a much more educated HR department these days, have become a very clear indicator for something that we need to discuss about. So what I'm trying to say is identify the keywords, recognize them as outcomes or causal factors, and start drilling into the subject more than you have in the past, possibly. And I'll leave it at that, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you, Jochen. I absolutely agree. And what I really like, one of the things you said that I really like, is the focus on language. So, sorry, I'm not sure why this is. Yeah. You know, part of the benefit of this, I always originally came at human synergistics tools from the perspective that the value to the client is in the data, you know, the information that we're telling them about themselves, and anyway, those factors. But a lot of what I find is actually helpful, or also helpful to clients, is the structure itself, you know, having a model to understand how culture actually plays out, how it actually affects our performance, the kinds of things that influence culture in our organization, as well as the language, you know, just to describe culture itself. You know, what are we looking for? What do we need? What's consistent with our values? What is that called? What does that look and feel like? and then having that language that we can use across the organization in terms of how does that reflect in terms of effective leadership behavior, team dynamics, culture itself, and so on. And I agree with also your point, and that oftentimes while we're using a culture tool, the focus of this development or the purpose is not focused perhaps on culture, right? We're doing this for a variety of different purposes, but at the end of the day, it's the way our people interact with one another and approach their work that really has the predominant effect on how they perform at that work, and their own sense of well-being and accomplishment achievement as being members, and that's culture. So however we want to think about it, understanding those patterns that are playing out in our business amongst our people, what they are, and I think more importantly again how they play out, so that we have clarity and guidance in this organization. What really does work, what really does drive excellence, what are the areas that we really need to focus our and our people's attention and energies to perform at our best. Very good. Yes, it's a lot of reasons for culture assessment. Christian, Philip, anything you'd like to add? Oh, Philip, I'm sorry, I think we lost you.
No, I came back. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, we could do a whole roundtable on the reasons for culture assessment, but I usually find that the purpose at the end of the day is to give organizations enough and clarity in terms of what's taking place, so that they can make informed decisions and effective decisions moving forward about how we're going to lead and guide this organization into the future. And again, having good data that's telling you the truth, and having a causal model that's proven, so that we can understand what this information is, why it matters, and also what we can expect moving forward when we do something differently. That's another thing I really like about having such rigorous history and research behind these instruments is, clients don't have to be concerned about what happens if we actually do make these changes. We can see exactly how that plays out, oftentimes in their existing data sets. What happens when people receive more positive feedback? How does that play out in the current? What behavior does that encourage in this organization, and what does that affect? So anyway,
can I ask Christian and Philip, what is their experience? Do you have different experiences based on your regional activities? Is Africa a different one?
Well, I mean, it's interesting that the way you framed it, I really liked your point about literacy and about like the level of literacy in the organization and how that informs the readiness of an organization to engage with the effectiveness inventory. Because I think that's really, really important. When we use HS so much as well, we sometimes become vaguely obsessed with the HS, and that's the only tool that exists. It's the only one that's worth using, sure. But there are other ones, and there are other frameworks that people use. And the nice thing is, anybody who's done any HR training, you show them that climate thing, and they will pick stuff up. The job design factor, for example, I was talking to another consultant working for a client of mine, and we were trading notes. She was doing a whole lot of stuff on org design for them, and I just completed the culture survey, and she was like, yeah, a lot of the stuff feels very, very familiar. Like these factors are factors that are part of other models. What's unique about HS, though, is the comprehensive nature of that graphic. It's like in one graphic, you've got the entire thing. You've got everything you need to know. So I do think increasing literacy does increase the power of this. But also, if you've got a literate audience in some of the theory around HR, the different elements, and they take the time to look at the climate factors and understand them, my experience is they get super excited, because it's like, we talk about these things, but we talk about them. We do a little initiative here. We pulse this thing, we pulse that thing, we pulse communication, we pulse empowerment. But at no point do we ever get this idea of, oh my goodness, here's the whole kit and caboodle, everything you'd ever want to know about running your organizations on one page. So to your point, I think that getting this through the door, people have different motivations. But if people sit with it for a bit, I always find they get super duper excited. So yeah, I think your point about literacy is a really good one.
It creates a language that people understand very quickly, grasp very quickly. I had a feedback this morning from another client who said that's the one thing that struck them most. They presented the circumplex. They weren't worried about the 400-page report, but the idea of constructive behavior being blue, yellow, blue, green, and red actually struck home, and not just with that organization. It's something that people can relate to really quickly, and that they also understand the high-level meaning of that. Don't need to go into the detail of being humanistic or conventional. They get the message, this is an effective behavior, and I need to find a different way of dealing with that. So that really is helpful.
Yeah, agreed. That fact that there's so much depth and detail, but at the same time, you're right, sort of at the surface level, there's a lot to recognize sort of inherently and for people to be able to connect with. So, when we talk about culture development, there's always that stage of communicating to our people what we need, what we want, what we're trying to do more of, and why we need that, and all of those good guiding messages. And that's something that not only we need to do, but we need to do consistently with our people. And having something that has a language and there's a framework, and we're not usually using obviously the language directly in the model around self-actualizing, but we can talk about creative and curious and innovative, and what that is in our business, and why that helps us do good work as an organization, and how that's in our values. And anyway, and that's gives us something that we can translate and communicate to our people. It doesn't have to be all of that depth. We can, again, once we have that detail, understand where we need to focus, and then communicate on those key pieces.
Jochen, if I can add something to your question, I don't use OCI a lot, but I do use LWS and LSI across the world. And to add on to what Christian said is it gives people a different vocabulary of how to talk about what troubles them or what they like. My experience, people can't describe behavior, but once they have a circumplex, it gives them a way to talk about what can be changed, what can be shifted, what the problems are. And it doesn't matter where in the world you are, there is a very strong relevance. It doesn't mean that it's exactly the same, let's say in Singapore to Germany, for example, but you can identify the differences, and you can find a way to have a conversation about what works or what doesn't work.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you can see it in practice. I remember we used to do an exercise with leadership teams where we would ask them questions about different parts of this model with reference to their business. And so if you ask them, for example, outcome questions, which is basically questions about performance and so on, they were very easily able to answer those questions, right? We know how we're delivering on KPIs. We look at that a lot. We know all about that. They would also be very clear typically on climate factors, right? What are the structures within the organization? What's the mission? What are the goals? How are jobs designed? What are we rewarding? Those sort of systems. Then we would ask questions about, so what are the expectations? What are the patterns of behavior playing out? And all of a sudden, we have no idea how to necessarily what's happening beyond our own immediate, perception. But secondarily, how do I describe that? And that again is kind of a fun thing to illustrate. Things leaders are really aware of are certain parts of the system, but don't even really have a language or a way to discuss or align around the other parts of the system. And ironically, the one that's most directly connected to performance and employee well-being. So an important piece, of course, with culture. Yeah.
Philip, just as a matter of interest, if you're talking leaders, LWS, have you tried the OCI ideal as a way to create a common language.
I have worked with it, but in the organizations that I've worked with, OCI and OCI deal was not an option. So that's why my experience is very much limited to LSI and LWS.
Yeah, but it's still, again, it's amazing the parallels between these levels of the tools, and again, the value of having that language around leadership and what is appropriate and what is good leadership here and consistent with values is powerful. Very good. Thank you, Mr. Jochen. Any other points on the topic of reasons for culture assessment?
Sure, there are plenty.
Yeah, I was talking to a client this morning, and then one of the reasons I was illustrating was because we don't want to waste any more time. One of the good reasons to get this information is so that we actually know what's happening and can actually, make something happen, create real sustainable change. And until we have some kind of assessment, it is very difficult for organizations to recognize, what's playing out, how it's playing out, and so on and so forth. So I would suggest to actually make progress, to stop running around in the circles that we see a lot of organizations chasing their tails on engagement or whatever it might be, without ever actually getting at the real causal reasons for these things. So good. All right, I believe that, thank you, Jochen, always appreciated, and everyone for your input. I think we have a scheduled 10-minute break, which is probably fair at this point, and then we'll pick up and continue with Mr. Botha's discussion. Thank you very much. All right, see you guys in 10 minutes. Thank you.
Takes a while. So the reason why I chose to talk about authenticity is that in working with leadership and behavior, authenticity as a coach is vital for me, and it's something that I cannot coach without going into it. And in the last 15, 20 years, I've worked with thousands of participants in coachings or in leadership retreats. And what I realized in the last year was that actually my perception of what I see as authenticity has shifted. Not that it has shifted, but that it has deepened. And John, now my presentation is uploaded again, but I'm trying to get it onto the stage. Okay, now it's on the stage. Excellent. So we're back. John, I have a question. Are you able to forward the slides or not?
Yes, I can. I believe you should be able to as well, but happy to do that.
Yeah, that would be very helpful.
You bet.
Because I have to do something else.
I understand how that is.
And that's what I need to get focused on. So let's get started. So what I want to talk about is really what drives us and what shapes us, and how we can change the way that we lead and the impact that we have by really reconnecting with who we truly are. As I said, it's authenticity. And what I've learned from the past 20 years and is always encountering the same thing. And I'm sure your experience is the same, and we can talk about that, once I've run through the presentation. But leaders aren't just facing external challenges in their environment. They're trying to cope with the pressure of delivering impact through a shift in behavior most often. But what they're really struggling with is an internal disconnection that holds them back from showing up as their absolute best. And that's what led me to do the work that I now call the leadership catalyst. And it's built on a simple but powerful insight that the deeper the connection, the more powerful the transformation that we can achieve. And that transformation isn't just cosmetic, it's structural. It shapes the very architecture of how we show up and, of course, behave. And now, I didn't originally set out to change the definition or to redefine authenticity. But over the years, leaders kept asking me in the retreats that we do the deeper questions about authenticity, and that somehow shifted something within me, and it shifted for me automatically. And most probably that's no coincidence, because I began my career as a yoga teacher, and that training and in inner awareness and guided reflection helped me support others in turning inward too. So about a year ago, I realized that I was approaching authenticity from a completely different perspective than the traditional coaching lens, which often defines authenticity simply as living in alignment with your values. Now, in my experience, that's true and that's great, but there's more. And what emerged in my work went much deeper than just living in alignment with your values. So the model that I've developed, the architecture of authenticity, is simply a way of naming and making visible what had already unfolded for me naturally over time. So John, if you're able to just switch the next slide, I'd be grateful. Excellent. So let's go deeper and just explore. Now, one question that came up over and over and again in retreats is, but what is authenticity really? And this is where I started noticing something really important, but also a little bit unexpected, that despite a very strong desire to be authentic and unique, the moment we explore the idea that something inside me may need to shift, something kicks in, and that is resistance, tension, and self-protection. And what I noticed was a lot of oppositional behavior and pushback, where participants keep pushing back and saying, but this is just who I am. And here's the tension, that we long to be authentic, but we fear that becoming more authentic might require us to change. And that fear, especially without knowing where it might lead, triggers a deep defensiveness. And in traditional coaching, as I said before, authenticity is often defined just as living in alignment with your values. And the living your values and experiencing that work, I noticed that something in the layers started unfolding. And that really brought me to the key insight that I try to capture in this model. So if we look at the first level, which is at the core, because the animations don't work, sorry, there is what I call a biological level. Authenticity is instinctive. It's part of our DNA. It's part of how we are wired, how our brain patterns work, how our personality traits work, our past strategies that we've learned. And this is the level that we arrive at or arrive with. And we learn to work with it through our childhood and adulthood. But very often we mistake it for being the whole truth of who we are. And that is the voice that says, but this is who I am. And that is also our comfort zone, because we're not willing, we are used to it, we're not willing to move outside it. And that at the same time is also the paradox, that that same comfort zone is also a barrier. And that barrier, if we're willing to cross it, becomes a gateway to something much deeper and much more fundamental. The second level, which I call the values-based level, is where authenticity becomes intentional. And as we start building awareness through reflection, we start creating the space for choice. And that is where we are able to open the door for real transformation, because we now no longer reacting, but we are focusing on conscious choice. And then we have a third level, which is what I call soul level authenticity, where authenticity becomes transformational. And it's now not just about what we do, but how deeply we are being who we truly are. And that is where congruence begins to emerge. We're no longer trying to become someone. We simply are who we were meant to be at a very deep level. Now, each of these three levels reveals a new dimension of awareness and self-awareness, choice, and impact that we have on others. But the other thing that becomes visible and is almost the glue to everything, and that is connection. Firstly, the connection to myself, to who I really am, and through that, a much deeper connection to others. And it is this connection that sustains authenticity, that builds and sustains trust, resonance, and relationship. And again, this is where a key shift emerges, because as we go deeper, the leader we become transforms, and we move from being reactive to being aligned, and from being controlled by the moment to being able to shape it consciously. And this isn't just theory, it's practical at a very deep level, because we all know how hard it is to change defensive behaviors, whether it's aggressive defensive behavior or passive defensive behavior. It's not that easy to change. And most leaders, in my experience, want to show up more constructively. However, willpower alone doesn't cut it. And the thing that I've now noticed over and over is that the deeper we go into authenticity, the easier it becomes to behave constructively, not by choice, but with, not by force, but with intention and choice. And in my experience, this is where true leadership lives, because we are able to become the leader we always suspected we were able of being, and not by pushing harder, but by becoming more of who we truly are at our inner core. Now, the model isn't about fixing people. It's about helping them discover what's already present at a deep level, to help them reclaim who they truly are at that deepest level of being. And the process is powerful. It's not just developmental, it's catalytic, and it's transformational. And as I alluded to before, at the heart of this is the glue of connection, the connection to self, the connection to others, and that's really where the magic starts. So, John, if you could fast forward one for me, please. So the journey to authenticity is essentially a journey from biology to the soul, to explore that authentic choice. So if we go on this journey more clearly, and this is what I've noticed and what I've mentioned already, is that authenticity isn't just one thing. It lives at different depths, and the shift between them transforms. So if we explore the biological level of authenticity deeper, this is the level where we grow up with, what we're most familiar with. It's where we are instinctive. It's represented by our default wiring, our personality traits, our emotional reflexes, our stress responses, the strategies that we learned. It shows up in the behavior that are shaped by survival, by identity, and by the brain-body connection. And that is what causes us to say, this is just who I am. This is how we know ourselves. And when we operate at this level, everything comes from reflex. We react, we cope, we survive, but we don't choose. And if we are able to go through the barrier, and I'll come to the barrier in the next slide, in the second level, in value-based authenticity, is where we start to reflect. And through reflection, we build awareness. And through awareness, we're able to pause and ask ourselves, what deeply matters to me? And that's a conversation we start having with ourselves about what values are. And with that awareness of what deeply matters for me, we start opening the space for choice. And as we start aligning our behavior with our values and what is deeply important for us, we start acting from intention rather than instinct or reflex. And as we step deeper into that authenticity, we step deeper into behavior that is grounded, energized, and real. And we start shifting from defensive behaviors to constructive behaviors. When we continue to the third level, soul level authenticity, it's no longer about behavior or choice. It's about being. And in this space, we become fully congruent with our deep sense of self. And we're not trying to be someone, but we're simply being who we are. And the phrase that I use for that is, I am that I am. It's a biblical term, but it's deeply symbolic and it's energetic. And now I'm able to just be, and it doesn't mean that I'm perfect and that I will never be have defensive behaviors, because obviously we do. But the shift and the transformation towards constructive behaviors is literally profound. It becomes easy because it comes from the inside out. So as we move from the biology to soul, our leadership shifts, as I said, from reactive to aligned, and from performing to being. And this is the journey that is at the heart of the leadership catalyst. John, if you could forward the slides again for me once. Yeah, so we're on the second last slide. So if we go a little bit deeper, this slide captures where the journey truly begins. And this is, John, sorry, one slide back.
Go back.
Yeah, one slide back. Because I want to talk about the threshold, the barrier, moving out of our biological authenticity. And this threshold is the moment where everything is able to change, because this is where we can move from being reactive to being able to choose consciously. And we start in the comfort zone. But as I said before, the comfort zone is more like a cage. It captures us, and we're very literally unable to move outside of that without being very brave, without doing something very, very different. Because this familiar space we live in is shaped by our biology, our conditioning, our fear, but it feels safe because it's instinctive. It's in our habits, in our reflexes, and in our patterns. We believe that it's freedom, but it's just about survival. So the barrier is not out there, it's actually very much inside of us. And it keeps us in that unconscious loop of reflex and reaction. And why we always end up saying, but this is just who I am, because we're stuck in those protective patterns. So stopping and reflecting on what truly matters allows something new to become possible. And that is where we're able to cross the gateway, which is the space where we create awareness through reflection. and really where the true journey of authenticity starts. And this is where, for me, the quote of Viktor Frankl becomes absolutely palpable, because when I'm no longer reacting, when I'm no longer conditioned by reflex, by patterns, where I'm able to create that space to have choice, that is where we are able to become powerful. But as leaders, where we can truly step into leadership and start taking responsibility for the impact that we have on them. So between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies growth and freedom. And that is very much what the core is of leadership. So on the last slide, John, so what happens once we cross the threshold? And this is the journey from the biology to the soul. It's the journey where we explore our authentic choice, because authenticity isn't a trait. It's a conscious decision about how we show up. It's not about just what we do. It's about how we are being. And every time we make that shift, we take responsibility for our impact on ourselves, on others, and on the system around us. And as I've said before, each level of authenticity reveals a deeper quality of connection, and hence a deeper quality of impact on those around us. So at a biological level, we're often disconnected. We're operating from habit, from past strategies, from defense. And in leadership, we become reactive, unconscious, and defensive, with obviously the corresponding behavior style. And at a values-based level, we begin to reconnect to what matters, to what we believe in. And as in leadership, we then become more intentional, more trusted, and resonant. And at a soul level, it's not about performing or proving, it's about being. And in that congruence, we become aligned and deeply rooted in who we are. And this is where in leadership we become inspirational and transformational. So the journey is the practice. And it's not about cognitive perfection. It's about conscious congruence, because it's the connection that changes us, not the knowledge. And that shift from habit to alignment, from reflex to congruence, that's the shift that changes everything. So that's literally everything that I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Wow, Philip, thank you so much. That's a very, very helpful and insightful, and touches on so many things that we experience as coaches, and and even connect back to the tools. I love the fact that you're taking authenticity and almost breaking this into a learning journey. I agree with you completely. I think the deeper we can, the more fundamental aspects of people or leaders we can address with this kind of development, the more positive and the better potential we have to create change. I love the focus on moving from, the biological to the intentional, being able to, understand that between stimulus and response, there is power, choice in what we do and how we react. So anyway, I love all the concepts. I'll stop and love to hear from Christian and Jochen as well on this.
Yeah, Philip, firstly, thank you. It's really a real tour de force. Some very, very powerful concepts in here. And yeah, I don't want to say too much, because I think a lot of what you've said relates so clearly to some of the things that I wanted to cover before. But maybe I can ask one question, which is, how do leaders respond to this? Because you've got some leaders who are going to be ready. It's hard enough to get someone to take an HS report seriously and to delve into it. The kinds of concepts that you're dealing with here, powerful as they are are going to be very threatening for many, many people, particularly people who've armored themselves up with ego and with status and title and whatever. I mean, when you encounter that kind of resistance in a corporate space, what do?
The answer, Christian, is probably not what you want to hear. And this literally is where the core of what I talk about, the magic starts with connection, is so fundamentally true. You know, if I go to leaders and I say to them, this is what we're going to do, you scare the bejesus out of them. Which is why I would never show this to somebody that is going to go through a journey. But if you work with them in the same way as we work with people as a coach, and you create a safe space, and you work with them triggering their parasympathetic response as opposed to their sympathetic response, without thinking about it, they're on the journey. And once people start discovering who they truly are, it is intoxicating. So it's a journey of overcoming fear, bias, reflex. So you can't go on this journey if you haven't established that core trust, safe space. I'm not sure if I've answered your question, Christian.
I mean, no, I think you absolutely have. I mean, what you're saying is that this is not a linear process. You don't say, here are the 10 steps I want you to take, and you'll basically be authentic at a soul level at the end of 4 weeks. I mean, it's very clear that it's a much more nuanced process. Your connection piece is super important, because obviously the connection to the coach is tantamount. But I mean, what I want to talk about in a sec is also connection to team, connection to organization. It's like, how do you help leaders see their own reflection in the way in which people change towards them when they choose change themselves, which I think is probably some of the most powerful evidence, certainly more powerful than a coach telling them, well done, I think you did a great job there, when they observe people around them, same people they've been struggling with. I mean, Jochen, you provided some really good examples of this earlier. The same people who've been oppositional and resistant to you all the time suddenly say, you're creating space for me to be a better leader as a senior person. I mean, that's so powerful. So this connection piece, that totally resonates with me.
If I can add something to that, Christian, is that to start connection, you need to start having a conversation about what matters most. And if I do this in a retreat, and if the participants knew to what depth of level they would be sharing who they are, they would never go there. They would never go there, because the self-protection patterns that we have are just too strong. But once you start that conversation about what's important to me, what's most important to me, which is essentially a conversation about values without naming values, that starts connection. And once that connection is there, people can go anywhere, because they start realizing that we're all the same. And that connection is, even though it is so deep, it's palpable. And that is the basic foundation of getting people to work together, getting people to share, getting people to engage. I'm curious about what you're bringing to us afterwards.
As am I. Philip, we have a question from the chat I wanted to share. So I think if I click this, it should come up. So thank you very much for the question from the audience, Peter. How do you battle this is who I am for authenticity? That's the question.
Well, it literally is talking about this is who I am, and helping them become curious about who they are, because with a very few questions, you can help them understand that saying that is just a reaction. And again, the conversation about what matters most to you, most people have not reflected on that. And as they start that reflection, without realizing, they're already starting to transcend what I call the barrier. Because in the moment that you start reflecting on what matters, you're starting to create space. And yes, they will still be able to relate to this is who I am. But it's not about winning the argument. It's about allowing them to experience something different. It's not about the theory. I'm not sure if I was able to answer your question, Peter.
If not, please feel free to rephrase in the comments, and happy to discuss it further. Thank you very much. Jochen, any insights from your side?
Thank you. Thanks, Philip, for this very insightful model, which I'm going to steal right away for my next interaction.
I'll send you my bank account, Jochen.
Yeah, that's right. The one thing I'm not struggling with, what I find when I do something like that with clients, we have a values discussion, and where would you like to go, and what's the constructive behavior, and what does it do to you? I'm going through a process not nearly as refined as the ones that you have planned out for us here. I'm wondering, how do you deal with the tendency or the immense attraction that the comfort zone has for people to go back from a level of authenticity, which is beyond, I mean, they walked out into the wild beyond their comfort zone, and they have reached another level of authenticity, not quite the soul authenticity, but they, I would expect, sort of run into pushback, reactions from others. What are you doing now? I thought you were a different individual. What are you talking about now? We want you to be back in your comfort zone, not quite verbally, but in the sense of the word. How do you deal with the external effects of that journey to the individual who tries to embark on it?
The way I would answer that, Jochen, is literally as doing retreats as a leadership development, but also from a coaching perspective as a coach. It's the minute that you help people create a different experience of who they are, and simply the question of what matters to you regarding specific topic takes them on a journey of reflection that causes a parasympathetic experience. And that is, I want to use the word intoxicating. It's of course not intoxicating, but that's what we love of being inspired. But once you start, if you talk about neuroplasticity, once you start, you've taken that journey once, and you take the journey again, you start practicing neuroplasticity. So let's say the old highway in the brain of what the comfort zone is still there. But as you start practicing and repeating the same behavior, the same exercise, the new pattern starts happening. And at some stage, the old one becomes faint. So it's really just hearing it, it's not going to change it. But if you give people the experience over and over, that helps them cross that border of comfort zone.
Are we creating a new comfort zone?
Obviously,
Okay.
because our comfort zone is where we feel great, is where we love being. But what we never think about is that actually my current comfort zone is totally reactive, totally reflexive, and most often I'm default in defensive behavior. But we're used to that, so that's what we call the comfort zone. So the new comfort zone is based on a space where we build connection to ourselves and to others, and it is a much more enjoyable space.
Thank you. Lovely.
Yeah, no, agreed. Absolutely. Thank you very much, Philip. Great content. Then, in the interest of time and to make sure we cover all topics, let me switch gears and happy to discuss Christian Sellars, your topic, of course, from transforming engagements, catalyzing leadership. Very exciting topic. Love to hear
And I have to say, Philip, I chose that topic before I knew you were on the podium, so I didn't purely steal it from your title. But let me start by saying I'm hoping this can transition a little bit between Jochen's presentation and Philip's presentation. I'm just going to share a few observations. I don't have any slides, but over the past 6 months, I've had the enormous pleasure of running a number of consultancies based on the OCI. So based on the organizational culture inventory, where leaders have seen fit to engage me because their organizations both have been hugely successful, but the donor environment, both of them are NGOs, and the donor environment, as we know, has been turned upside down in East Africa over the last couple of months. And so they're scrambling to continue their growth and to serve new clients, find ways of expanding the base of people they're working with. And in both instances, facing organizations where maybe it's not complacency, but certainly there's a level of maybe arrogance which surpasses the kind of threats that they can see coming forward. And so both of them desperately wanting more agile organizations, and also ones where they're tapped a great deal less to do stuff, and where folk basically have the confidence and accountability to drive change. So both of them did the OCI. The results were really spectacular. Both of them had results in the sort of 90% across a whole range of metrics you'd love them to have. So around mission alignment, around leadership behaviors, around communication, around empowerment, both organizations superb, really, really good. So strong cultures. But both of them also suffered a great deal in the area of job design, particularly around autonomy and particularly around significance. We had a small core of senior leaders in both organizations essentially doing all the value-added work and having great difficulty trusting people below them. And that trust, that feeling being well felt in their organizations and being reciprocated by folk waiting and not taking risks and not risking the ire of their senior leaders by doing things not quite the same way. So that's the context. Both of them have done great work in the last couple of months in terms of communication moving forward. But the thing that for me has been amazing, and again, Jochen, Philip, and John, I'm really interested in your thoughts about this because, again, I'm relatively new to this space, is observing the role of the leader as the catalyst through this process. And in both instances, I've been blessed by leaders who, in a context, again, East Africa can be a relatively sort of rough place for leaders to be authentic and to be open. But we found ourselves in a situation where we have these leaders trying to show up in an authentic way, and what I've observed is when they've done that, it's provided very, very powerful movement. But there's also been an element of skepticism, which I've been quite surprised by. And Philip, this kind of goes to your point about connection as well, in that I had anticipated that in instances where leaders would show up with vulnerability and they would talk about their own accountability for cultural gaps, or they would say, I recognize there are some things I could be doing differently, or I recognize for reasons that made sense at the time, I drove a particular issue around these HR systems or this approach to discipline or whatever it was. There are some issues in the organization they can trace back to their own behavior. But what's surprising is that when they show this vulnerability and they're authentic and they put the areas out in front of them, it's kind of not enough. And the organization, to some extent, firstly, is very uncomfortable with senior people showing vulnerability and weakness. It could be culturally specific, but there's this idea that, no, if you're a senior leader, you know everything, and we go to you and you tell us what to do, and then we perform and you reward us. So there's that kind of vibe that's going on as well. But I also get the sense a lot of it is it's creating tension, because often second, third layer is where the real issues lie, in that you've got a lot of spectacular high individual performers who are used to intervening and firefighting and coming in at the last minute and saving the day. And they don't really want to change that, because that's essentially where they get their validation. That reactive behavior essentially is how they've won all of their career successes, by other people failing and them stepping in. And so then they're essentially creating this pattern of behavior where that's what happens. Poor delegation, poor setup, don't set people up for success. They don't deliver the goods. 2 weeks before the deadline, you're the hero, you rewrite the whatever it is, the grant proposal or the report, it goes out, the minister's ecstatic, everyone's ecstatic, and you've saved the day. And that pattern of behavior kind of, I think, is the one that and I don't think this is unique to these organizations. It's a generalized problem. So I guess for me, the question comes in, how do I help these leaders amplify? Because their intentions are good. They're doing the right stuff. They are showing vulnerability. They're owning the challenges in the organization. They're communicating in a way that is setting the tone about how they expect their people to speak to their teams. I don't know whether they're getting cut through yet. And for me, as a sort of the coach, I've got good relationships with them. I meet regularly with their reports, but I'm kind of very, very intrigued by the three of yours guidance of how do I keep this cascade going? Because my worry is that the leaders are not going to get the feedback they need, and they're going to be like, I did my best. Let's plug the holes we can. Let's charge on, because this is the team I have. Like, how do we get that cascade of authenticity to catch fire?
Philip, you go.
Christian, anything else you want?
No, just solve that for me. I'll be happy. I'm not very demanding, Philip.
The one thing where my that really got me, and I almost lost track from listening to you, was when you mentioned that showing authenticity doesn't really work. And I'm paraphrasing. It's not what you said, but it doesn't work in the way that I have heard of people tell me and what I've experienced myself. And the only thing that came up was that vulnerability is perceived as weak, but it is not. So, and I think it comes back, and John will probably be able to say a lot more about this than I can. If we present vulnerability as a leader in a certain way, it may be perceived as green. However, if I turn my story of vulnerability into something inspirational because of what I learned from it, the impact that I have on others is very different. So the only thing that I can think of is that it's very much about language of how I tell the story.
Yep.
But I think it would be interesting to find a couple of stories of how did they actually tell the story.
Yep.
Because if there isn't, and maybe this is what comes up to me now, is that if we share that moment of our own transcending a mistake that we did. That's where other people are inspired by it, but it's being able to tell that story. So it's not just that we talk about the mistake. It's also talking about the impact that mistake had on us, but that we were able to move on, that there is life beyond that.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's for me, the way I try and frame this sometimes, I mean, I think you've nailed it really well, because what you don't want is conversations that just add to the mire, conversations that just make work more. Oh my God, now my frigging boss is having a mental breakdown. Like, I have to deal with that as well. I mean, so essentially what you're trying to do is you're trying to frame the story in a forward-looking, progressive way. I mean, the stuff on the circumflex I always try and think about is like the from to. Okay, so we've built this really conventional organization. How are we going to go convention to achievement? How are we going to stop thinking about everything being defined by rules, instead saying, what are we trying to achieve? How do we keep it consistent with reasonable rules? Like, how do you begin to do it? And likewise for an individual leader, if an individual leader was showing up very aggressively with their reports before, they can say, well, there's a reason for that. I was being put under huge pressure by my board. And what I'm going to do going forward is give you more insight into what the board wants and why, and help you find the creativity, the experience, the network, all the things that I know you do brilliantly, rather than saying, do this thing to a much higher level than you've done before. So, I mean, I think to some extent what you're saying is you've got to find a way of giving the energy direction, because if the energy just sits, then effectively it just adds to the chaos and adds to the people's sense of being demobilized. You're trying to energize and inspire people through this. So I take that point. That's very clear.
If I can add something else to that, you know, in the way that I would approach it in my coaching is, you know, when we're vulnerable, something that is important for us, something that matters, is somehow in danger for us. And that may just be a perception.
Yeah.
But if we focus on the vulnerability, we focus on the danger. If we start asking the question, but why does this matter? We start moving towards what matters, to what is important. And now all of a sudden there is an insight that comes from danger, which triggers stress, to what matters, which can become inspirational. And there is a lot of insight that one can help people have with that.
Yeah, it's very clear. Very clear.
One of the things I think is interesting about speaking about vulnerabilities and then those sorts of topics is it gets people thinking about and aware of those things. You know, a lot of times in leadership roles or organizations, we don't want to discuss anything that might be seen as a weakness or vulnerability. And therefore, people aren't thinking about those things. And therefore, we end up making those sorts of mistakes and associated challenges with that, because we haven't prepared people for, you know, what are those areas we need to be concerned about, and you know, so I think it's good to think about the vulnerability. The other thing I would say is, you know, if you think about this from a systemic perspective, as soon as the organization or leaders start talking about or sharing vulnerabilities, I mean, functionally, I think in our models that would be climate, right? And the way where you describe doing that is falling across a, you know, facilitating and inhibiting strategy. So if I stand up and said, I made a mistake, vulnerability, and here are all the terrible things that happened, and here is the horrible consequences, and please never do this, and make sure we don't, you know, the inhibiting kind of, you can recognize the influence that has on others in terms of how they perceive taking risks, trying new things. Well, how do I respond if I make a mistake? Rather than sharing that kind of vulnerability and mistake, but rather sending the more facilitating messages around, here's how this happened, here are the consequences of it, but here's also what we learned from it, here's how we can prevent that from happening again, here's a good example of somebody's proactive behavior that got involved and solved the issue. Here's an example of a hero that, a company hero that did the right thing, right? Those positive references around it, it doesn't do us any justice not to talk about problems, mistakes, safety issues, whatever, though we need to talk about that, but we need to frame it in that more facilitating reference where it gives people not only information, but information that helps to guide their actions in a way that's functional and helpful and productive in the organization.
That's great.
Can I add another perspective on that one? Going back a step, before this leader develops an ability to talk about his vulnerability and sort of embarks on this values journey, he is in a context, he's an organization, and in most of cases, that's not a constructive organization. It might be a very defensive or aggressive organization. And I think the key word here is perception. Whatever that individual does is very visible to the rest of the organization. And even though you might be considering becoming and acting very constructively, let's leave the word of vulnerability out for a moment. That might threaten people who like to be in a very defensive mode. Let's think about achievement. That involves an element of risk-taking, of leaving the conventional ways of having done things for 20 years that way and not in a different way. And I think that needs to be brought across in such a way that the perception of the individual is appreciated. We understand where you are. Therefore, I will attune my behavior as a leader not to, now all of a sudden I'm very constructive, this is what I want, and this is very forward, and you do that now.
Sorry, Jochen, did we
sell the idea of this is where we were trying to go? I acknowledge the problems that you all might have with that. We're not doing what we used to do. We need to do something else. It's meant to be constructive. It is frightening shit at you, but still, we'll help you with that. So I'd like to take a slightly more tempered approach when it comes to pushing my values to the next level.
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, this thing about resistance for me is interesting because I mean the framing piece that's really helpful. Like how do we put this? How do we put this into more of a prescriptive, like move in this direction kind of way? I like that. But Jochen, you're talking to a reality that I think for the leaders must be very wearing, in that they're not going to get the feedback they want the first time. People won't believe them when they start behaving in this new way the first time. It's going to take a couple of rounds before it sinks in. And that for me also, Philip, your point about connection is a good one. I mean, the one thing I'm really trying hard to do with all of my assignments is to improve. I mean, affiliation, I often think is like one of the most undervalued kind of things, because we always think affiliation is barbecues and beer and whatever. I mean, it's not that. Affiliation is largely about quality of communication, relationships, listening. It's like mainly about listening. And that for me is like, particularly when you get to the second level resistance. Okay, the boss has found nirvana and they're going to go to an ashram. Christ, great. I mean, they weren't much help to us in the first place. So, now we have to continue struggling the way we were before. I mean, it's that kind of cynicism that for me is the thing that you've got to cut through. So helping leaders to show direction, I think, is a good thing. But also then, like in a culture that's defensive, it's like how do you keep digging to a point where other people let go and they try and find more of a values-based process. Philip, I mean, your point about purpose is good, but I mean, in these organizations, I'm not struggling with purpose. They all have shared values. They could make much more money in a bank if they wanted to. I mean, they really, truly, truly believe in what they're doing. Maybe some of the values we have to focus on, though, more interpersonal, just like making sure quality of relationship is something that we want, and we need to talk about that and acknowledge our current behavior maybe is getting in the way of that sort of true affiliative kind of connection.
Yeah, Christian, just to jump in on your point around affiliative, you hit a nerve. I agree completely. From the research data alone and looking at it from that direction, I've always been amazed at, firstly, of the constructive styles, you're right. Affiliative is the one that people might underrate the most. You can see it in ideal OCI ideal profiles or ideal impact profiles. They say leaders and people in organizations say they want lots of constructive. The one that might be a little weaker than the rest is affiliative. And it is a bit undervalued, I think. And the other thing I always noticed in the research data was how powerful it is. You think of achievement as being a powerful pattern of setting goals, making decisions, pushing things forward, and that logically connects with performance, like, getting projects completed and quality of products and services and so on. But we really overlook, the benefits that things like affiliative behavior have, and they're equally powerful. And in certain industries and certain areas, they're the most positively impactful behaviors we can use. And those are things like customer service roles, right? How we interact with other people, believe it or not, even things like healthcare roles, nursing roles. It's important in everything, but safety. I was always amazed at the frequency of safety issues in organizations, very strongly correlated by culture. But the one constructive style that helps reduce safety issues most dramatically in most industries is actually affiliative behavior. It's not the technical achievement sort of focus. It's the extent to which people are looking out for one another, thinking socially, thinking about each other's well-being, as strange as that sounds. The extent to which that kind of pattern is playing out is very predictive of improved safety results in organizations. So it absolutely is overlooked and something that. And the other point I wanted to make is, you kind of understand it, because if you think about the the behavior. Well, I guess one way to think of it is, if you look at behavior in task versus people orientation, it's easier to measure task-oriented things than it is interpersonal things. It's easier to measure how frequently you're getting things done or whatever, contacting customers or those kinds of data that still collect, than it is the extent to which you're, thinking about someone else's well-being. And those are less tangible and traditional metrics to capture. And therefore, I really think organizations are designed in a way, for the most part, to kind of overemphasize task accomplishment and to unintentionally, perhaps, but inherently undervalue those interpersonal patterns that really do drive performance. Very good. That is exactly our time for our session, gentlemen. So I hate to end it there. I want to see if there are any other questions, insights that you might have. I will say that I really enjoyed the time. I always enjoy hearing all of your insights. I like this format where we have the chance to discuss different topics together and do that a bit openly. So hopefully people can check in and get curious. And if nothing else, we can learn from each other and always enjoy the time with you guys. Thank you very much. If anyone listening, we're going to post this as well on our websites. If you're interested in these tools, models, or the kind of support and services that accredited practitioners provide, please feel free to reach out to us anytime. Thank you guys. Thank you everyone for joining, and I look forward to seeing you next time.